again. Now, I've said this before on Bay TV, that when you know you're getting older is when you know the statues around town, and whether it's John Moores and Cecil Moores and Ken Dodd and Bessie Braddock, Bill Shankly, John Lennon. The list is quite extensive, and the chap responsible for those very famous images in our city is my guest today, Tom Murphy. Welcome, Tom.
Hello, Joe.
Now, when you do this, I mean, you've become sort of Mr. Statue Liverpool sort of thing, really. You must have a favourite.
A favourite? Well, the favourite is usually the latest one. The latest one I did in Liverpool was the Liverpool Pals, the freezers in Lime Street Station.
Now, they're quite significant before we go on to the other things, because these are the people who were recruited by Kitchener and Lord Derby.
That's right.
To go off and fight in the First World War. And there were, I mean, like 5,000 of them went off, and only 2,800 came back.
That's right, yeah.
But the thing is, it must have been, and the contrasting freezers, of course, because the almost joy of going, they must have thought it was quite heroic to go off and fight, and then, of course, the tragedy of the big battles of the First World War.
That's right.
Now, that's in Lime Street Station. Why is it there? Why is it cited there? A lot of people see it, of course.
Well, we wanted a prominent spot for it. I said we, the committee that organised it. And that was the only space available. And that way we could display such a large work. Originally they wanted just an ordinary sculpture there of the sort of soldier and the wounded soldier. It was a bit of a sort of cliche, really. But so I said, wouldn't you like? I just made the Hillsborough Memorial, which is a frieze as well. It's a circular presentation, but it's basically a frieze design. So I quite enjoyed that, and it enabled me to tell a story. And I like telling stories. There's something I do more in painting than in sculpture.
There's a tremendous amount of detail in that. It's the old pals.
Well,
trees.
this was it. I sold it to them. I can tell a big story with this, and we told all the euphoria of going away and the excitement in Liverpool and this great meeting they had on St George's Plateau. And they're all signing up, and these were the first Liverpool Pals. And then in the second frieze, it looks at you see them going off on the trains. In the second frieze, you see the actual, the very last moments of the Second World War. And this sort of, all this, the tidying up really before they come home, and then the homecoming. And in the homecoming, there's just one lone soldier you see walking along the platform. Everyone else is sort of in the background. And his wife is turned away because she's trying to sort of think of the future, really.
Did you use your imagination there, or did you take it from newspaper cuttings and photographs? Or?
I used all the photographs, but then I have to weave the story and weave the design as well, because it's so there's so much going on. The design has to be pretty tight, really. Otherwise, it just come out as a chaotic.
Now, you're probably best known for your big statues, we'll call them. And in fact, also on Lime Street Station, there's the famous duo of Ken Dodd and Bessie Braddock, and of course, rumour had it, you can confirm it or otherwise, that there was a sort of little political dimension there, because she was a great Labour MP and he backed the Tories. Is that true?
That's right. Well, when I was asked to think about the commission, I came up with several suggestions, but all of them quite interesting, but because they could have went off in many directions, because the station has got so much history. But I said my own personal favourite would be, say, someone like Ken Dodd, because my father loved Ken Dodd, and I've always liked Ken Dodd, and I knew that the public would like him, and also nationally is known. And but it had to be two people, because it was about chance meetings, really. That was the title we kind of had. And so it had to be another woman to go with him. It had to be someone opposite him, really, someone who would oppose him, because it was all about two opposites, man, woman, this way and that
politically
way. And politically as well. But Ken Dodd actually suggested Bessie Braddock, because various people were mentioned, but he said, why not Bessie Braddock? Because they used to argue like cat and dog all the way to London. He was going off to the Palladium, she was going off to Parliament. And he told me this, you won't mind me telling you. She said, you should be ashamed of yourself. You're a Tory, and you've come from a working background. And he said, well, I've got something to conserve, madam. That's why I'm a Conservative, and this kind of thing. And they'd have all this way. Of course, like when we all leave the city, when they got to London, everyone was on the best behaviour, and then Mary Wilson and Harold Wilson would go with Bessie Braddock to see Ken Dodd play at the Palladium. And so everyone was, and then of course they'd argue all the way back home again.
And of course, Ken Dodd's one of the people you've immortalised. He likes his statue, does he?
What he likes is he doesn't like people to mess with him. So he was, the first thing he looked for was that his sort of what you call it, dimple, well, not pimple sort of thing was there. He's got various things that he doesn't like things changed about him. So once he checked them out, I think he was happy.
I mean, the great thing about the John and Cecil Moores statue in Church Street outside the original where Littlewoods was,
Yes.
and that's been moved once. It went to Old Hall Street outside and to come back.
Yes.
The great thing there, I mean, a lot of the viewers will know this, they're animated and walking along,
Yes.
and very often one ends up with a bag of chips in their hand,
That's
and
right.
somebody drapes a plastic bag over the other. You know, it's the standard joke, isn't it?
That's right.
Were you aware this sort of thing could happen?
Well, originally it was on the base, but people, when the sculpture's on the ground, it belongs to the people. When it's up in the air, it belongs to the establishment. That's why sculptures, like for instance, one of the most popular sculptures in the city is Eleanor Rigby by Tommy Steele, and it's just a straightforward, almost contemporary sculpture, but people love it because they sit next to it. So if you can sit next to a sculpture like the one in Huyton, Harold Wilson, or you can walk up to them like the Ken Dodd, Bessie Braddock, and now the Moores brothers, because they've been brought down. Because the scale is slightly wrong now, because they were meant to be, they were higher. But anyway, but people feel like it belongs to them. They can go up and shake their hand, touch them, and so on. Yeah. So
Well, we'll talk about making the things and the scale in the second half. But
Okay.
John Lennon's very accessible at John Lennon Airport.
that's
I mean,
right.
you can literally
Yeah.
go up and stand by it, and people have their photographs taken with these things. I
They
mean,
do, yes, yeah. Of course, they've moved the traffic in the airport, so they've got other plans now for the sculpture. They might move it, or they might build something around it. So, but that was it was actually the John Lennon was the first sculpture that got me known. Before it went to the airport, it was sort of it was on display in Clayton Square. I was there for a few years in its fiberglass version, and it was actually painted green then. It was sort of like a verdigris. And that's how I got my first commission of the Moores brothers by one of the Littlewoods chaps going through there, and he asked me to put in for this commission they were thinking of doing.
now you've done a lot of statues around Liverpool, but you've now got commissions from afar, have you not?
Yeah, I've done a lot of sculptures in Liverpool. So when I first started, funny enough, I thought I would get more work outside the city. But I didn't. But now I seem to have. I get calls from various places. There's a job coming up next year, a commission in Bristol, which I can't go into because they haven't, declared who it is. But the latest sculpture I'm making is for Reading of two soldiers.
Reading near Oxford.
Yeah.
Are these VC people?
Yeah, that's right. Well, Fred Potts, who was their one and only VC winner, and his story is amazing. It's about dragging someone along on a shovel in Gallipoli. So that's getting unveiled in November.
They're very excited about that, aren't they? Without being
Yeah,
passionate.
well, they haven't had. I mean, whereas in Liverpool we've got more sculptures in Liverpool than any city outside London. They've just got a few Victorian sculptures. So we're very blessed in this city for our art. We've got, because it was a very rich city, and we've got some wonderful sculptures. I'm deviating now, but we think of all the sculptures in St George's, behind St George's Hall. And
Well,
all
the
around
equestrian
place.
ones.
Yeah,
they're
well, all
unique,
of them.
aren't they?
Yeah,
The
they're
big ones,
unique.
the
yeah.
horses and things.
Yeah, that's right.
The thing is that these are things are meant to last. I mean, you've been doing this since you were 30. You're in mid-60s now.
Yeah.
Do you see these things as being for posterity?
Well, I think they'll move a bit. I mean, for instance, say like the Bill Shankly's moved 3 times now. The Moores brothers have moved. The Captain Walker's moved. So they tend to move a bit. You always think they're going to stay. I think the nature of bronze is that it does kind of give someone a kind of immortality, really. I think it's the greatest accolade for someone to have as a sculptor. It was interesting that I read an article a few years ago, this was about 18 80, and he said, I wish people would just die and go away instead of having clustering up the streets with all their images. But
But it is a statement from history, isn't it? And it does tell us where we're at
yeah,
in that sense. And therefore, hopefully they will be around for many years. And even the resin one, the old Pals thing in Lime Street Station, I mean,
yeah.
that would last 1,000 years if it stays in the station.
Well, yeah, well, last forever as long as it doesn't get damn water on it. But the thing about sculptures, as I say, it is a great honor for people. And I know the Egyptians said, if you remember, you'll never die as long as you remember your name.
Well, what we'll do when we come back after the break is actually talk about, I think people are quite fascinated, the making of these things. You know, they always think of Michelangelo with his chisel and hammer, but it's a bit different, and how they start off. So you can tell us a bit about that. And I want to speak about Captain Walker down at the pier head. So do join us again after the break. Welcome back, and my guest today is the Liverpool sculptor Tom Murphy. Now, Tom, we talked about some of your famous statues in the first half. We'll be mentioning some more of them, but I think people might be interested to know the process, briefly, the process of getting this. You mean you don't stand there with a big block of marble and a chisel?
No.
And even in the old days, they made, the ancient Greeks made models, didn't they, of clay or something?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what?
Well, sculpture is a bit like making a house, so you have to start with a plan. And the plan is the thing called a maquette, which just means a sketch model. So you've got suppose you meet the commissioners, you say, we'd like this, that, and the other, and you make some suggestions, say, well, I'll make you a model, see what you think. So you come back with this sketch model, or sometimes it's a more complete, it's almost a complete replica of the large model. And then once that's agreed, then that is your plan, basically. So you would you copy that. So you're basically going to make a larger one. So
Well, what
it's
do you
just,
make that in, the first model?
the first model will just be made in clay,
Clay, okay.
or wax. I mean, and this Michelangelo, I mean, there's waxes that Michelangelo made. A lot of these great artists actually used to throw away a lot of the preliminary works because they didn't like people to know what they got up to. Michelangelo would hide himself in a box. He'd have a box built around him so people couldn't see what he was up to. So, but basically, you take measurements off your model, and that's how you do it. But there's
And then it's cast from that.
but you're either putting stuff on with the sculptures, which is I do, so you're adding material, or you're taking stuff away, which is stone. But they both converge in the way it starts off, and you always start off with a model. So if you're making one in stone, you'd make a smaller version of it, and then you would put like a box around it. And if you imagine you could poke little pins into it, or they would be the points where you would measure it. So if you put like a little matrix thing around it, and you put a pin in it and say, right, now, if I'm going to make it 4 times bigger, then that would be a measurement. And then you take it over, and there's your rock inside. And then if you imagine you could drill a hole, and it starts off through fresh air, and then it goes through the rock. So that would be the 4 times distance in, if you follow me. And then if you did that all the way around, in theory, if you just tapped it, all the material would fall off, and there would be a sculpture.
Well, there's the whole thing about scaling, isn't there? You've got an example there of. I mean, I rather naively asked you before we got to the studio about life size, and these things tend to look life size, but in fact, you're quite a tall chap, and they're even more life size, aren't they? They're bigger than you think. There's El Shanks.
This is Shankly in clay, and you probably can't see it on the camera. There's a chain on each side. And that I could move the arms up and down. So when the clients came round, we'd discuss the best way of presenting. I also had 2 different hands on this one. One was an open hand, which gives them a sort of messianic look. Or the other one is this, whereas I'm the champion. So I had a choice really of 2 presentations, and the hands would have changed it dramatically.
But what's interesting is the scale.
The scale,
in the perspective is actually bigger than you think.
Yeah, this is 7'6", so that would see. Well, they usually say life is 6 foot, even though most people are not 6 foot. And this one is 7'6", so it's so this is life and a quarter. So if the higher the sculpture goes, like this is on some kind of a base about 3 foot tall. The higher the sculpture goes, the taller the sculpture gets. So the ones on the floor, like Ken Dodd and Bessie Braddock we discussed earlier, they're 6 foot.
What's interesting, of course, is that you're a painter as well. Do you find it easier to get? I mean, when you're doing famous people, it's got to look like them. It's not an abstract
Yes.
conception. Is it easier to get likeness in clay or in sculpture or
Well,
in
I find it
painting?
easier in clay because it's three-dimensional. It's a real object in real space. I mean, this is the difference really about the sculpture, is that it occupies real space. As somebody once said, you can bump into it in the night because it exists, you know. There's a difference, whereas in two-dimensional work like a painting or drawing, it's an illusion really. So I found it easy because I can see it and measure it, you know, go for a cup of tea and look at it, and I I sort of creep up on them, look at them from different angles. So basically, when I make a sculpture, I don't look at all the information. So if say I had to copy somebody, I wouldn't look at all the eyes and nose and mouth and all the rest. All I'm looking at it, I transfer it into a series of lines. So the outer line. So as if you can imagine, I'm twisting, say, not an apple, but say a pear around. You know, I'm copying that outer line all the time, and then gradually
I should imagine that
turning it
temptation,
in.
not in your case, but in generally, people would think, oh, the face is everything, and the body.
No, it's not.
Uh,
No.
but
Yeah.
you've got to have the spirit of the person, not
Yes,
just the
yeah.
likeness.
The head is only it's the arms and the shape of the body and the feet and the hands. Everything is just as important. Obviously, the face is the most important thing, because if it doesn't look like him in the face, then nothing else can look right. But the whole body's got to be there. Say in the case of Bill Shankly, there's research went into that, where he used to love gangster films. He modelled himself on James Cagney. He admired. He even spoke like James Cagney, if you think about it. You know, so the so his, and also he was an amateur boxer. So when you see his arms up like this, he's not lifting his arms up. He's lifting his arms up like a boxer, which means his shoulders project forward like that. So then all this power then. So there's like this power that runs right from his feet right through to his arms. And you could, well, as I do that, see, this is nothing. This is something, you know. And there's a sort of tension in the wrists, and
The animation,
it's
the
like a
feeling
big
of
bow, yeah,
animation.
yeah. So that makes the sculpture exciting then. And also, say if you look at that one, I was asked to make that particular pose, but that's a rather dull pose because it's two-dimensional. It's a photograph really. So in order to make it work, one of the legs comes back, the body's coming forward in your face, and this tension and then this idea of this big champion and all this.
Well, one of my favourites of yours, not least because my grandfather was a great friend of Johnny Walker, Captain F.J. Walker, who the hero of the Battle of the Atlantic, and that's down at the pier head, is that's very animated. There he is, leaning forward.
Right.
From a photograph, it was
Yes.
done with his binoculars.
Right.
The great thing about Captain Walker, for viewers to know, is that apart from Nelson, he was the only sea captain ever to have hoisted the General Chase, which is every man for himself. I mean, a heroic action
Yes.
in a battle that Winston Churchill said probably turned the course of the war. So a very important statue,
Yes.
that one, to have
Yeah.
down there. But then there's all the finer details. I mean, some people who are involved with the mission say his hair wasn't, worried his hair didn't look curly enough or
Yeah,
something.
his daughter was. You always find the family are sort of, they become obsessed with one thing. In the case of the Moores brothers, it was the hands and the feet. They wanted them really small and so on. Captain Johnny Walker, they seemed to be only interested in the hair, which is strange. So anyway, we got all that right in the end. But if you ever look at that sculpture, you'll notice that it's all about texture. They always do something different in every sculpture. Like if you compare it with, say, the Billy Fiore sculpture, it's very smooth.
Where's the Billy Fury one?
That's on the waterfront as well.
Right.
But that one, the Captain Walker, is all about texture. So texture in his jumper, and he had this leather sort of jacket. Because when they were at war, they dropped all this uniform caper.
Yes.
It was just like, let's get on with the job. And that was just for when you were when you were at home really. But So that's a waterfront sculpture, and as you say, it's a very his eyes are looking out to the sea where his ships used to take off.
When somebody says, you know, smaller hands, wavier hair or something, how do you get around that? How do you change it? I mean, you said about in the Bill
Yeah.
Shankly example that the arms could be lifted and the hands could go further out, etc.
Yeah.
How do you make these
Well,
changes?
this is why, I mean, it's funny because people say, oh, they've got all this 3D imaging now. But a sculpture is not about that. It's a sculpture, apart from, you've got to capture, as I say, with the likeness, the spirit, but you've also, the design has to work. So if you made a sculpt, if you could sort of make a 3D image of, say, Bill Shankly and put up there, it wouldn't look as good as a sculpture. So it's better when you make a sculpture of a person because it's an artwork, it's an interpretation of that person. So you can make you could make the arm slightly longer, or the leg slightly longer, or the head slightly bigger, because you've got to allow for the angle of somebody looking at it, and there's all these kind of things. But I remember a famous boxer, I won't mention his name, but he's a very small boxer, and he had an image, he had a cast taken of himself, and he looked ridiculous because it just looked like a little. Because when you're in bronze as well, it shrinks. So if you were, say, 5'3", you'd end up looking like 5'1" or something, and
exaggerate
it
the
absorbs
features.
the light, so you look like a little boy, you know. So the sculpture, the way there's all kinds of things you've got to think about before you.
I can imagine all the viewers actually thinking, what small boxers do we know who could have made a... Is there an element of, briefly, of vanity in this when people do commissions? Like, I'd like a bust made of myself or something, or...
Well, people never ask for a bust made of themselves, but they're always delighted to get one. But, you know, well, I suppose some people do, but most
Well, people used to commission years ago painting, oil paintings, didn't they? I didn't know whether this was the latest fad.
Well, they usually, other people get them made for them, and, you know, they sort of, it's like, say, Gladstone, they made a sculpture of Gladstone, but he hated getting his portrait, and he was sick of, because he'd have to sit there for hours while people painted him, and he always looks really angry, as Beethoven does. You see portraits of Beethoven, he hated having his portrait.
He looks very grumpy, doesn't he?
He is grumpy, yeah, that's why he always looks so grumpy.
Now, many years ago, when I first interviewed you in the 70s, I think it was, you very kindly gave me a little model, which I have at home still, of Mozart. Is that worth a lot of money now? Because you made it.
I don't know. Funny enough, I've got one of those on my mantelpiece, but that one is I was really keen on accuracy then, and both Mozart and Beethoven had smallpox, and they both faces were slightly scarred, and like in Beethoven, you can see his face is quite scarred and so on. Yeah. So, but I took all the images off contemporary pictures of the time, and both those images are Mozart of.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, we could talk for hours, and obviously many more commissions ahead, Tom, and I wish you well, and thank you for being a guest today. And
thank you.
As for the viewers, when you walk through Liverpool now, you can walk through having met the chap who's responsible for some of those images. I'll be back with you again shortly. Cheers.